In the quiet town of Meridian, Idaho, a single moment of rage would leave an entire community shaken. It was March 11th, 2011, when Robert Hall came face to face with the man his wife, Candy, had been secretly seeing. In a Walgreens parking lot under the night sky, emotions ran high, and decisions were made that could never be undone. Shots were fired, and in an instant, a man lay dead, while the truth of an affair unraveled before the police and the public. This was no random act of violence. It was the outcome of choices, betrayal, and a confrontation that had been building for weeks. Who was Emmett Corrigan? Why was Candy Hall caught between two men? And what led Robert Hall to pull the trigger? In 2011, the residents of Meridian, Idaho, were confronted with a crime that left more questions than answers. Emmett Corrigan, a 30-year-old attorney, was found dead in a Walgreens parking lot. He was a father of five, a rising star in his legal practice, and by all outward appearances, a man with everything going for him. His life, however, came to an abrupt and violent end, and the story behind his death revealed fractures in the lives of those closest to him. At the center of this tragic event was Candy Hall, a paralegal who worked for Emmett. She was a married mother of four, juggling her career and family life. Her husband, Robert Hall, was a man who had dedicated himself to his family, working long hours as a truck driver to provide for them. Yet behind closed doors, their marriage had begun to strain under the weight of secrets. Candy and Emmett's professional relationship had crossed boundaries, and their affair became the catalyst for a confrontation that no one saw coming. On the night of March 11th, Robert Hall discovered his wife's infidelity and decided to confront the man she was involved with. The setting for this encounter was the Walgreens parking lot, a place where lives intersected in the most devastating way. The murder of Emmett Corrigan wasn't just a crime of passion, it was the culmination of personal struggles, choices, and emotions that spiraled out of control. This case became a focal point of public attention, not just for the tragedy of a life lost, but for the insight it offered into the complex dynamics of human relationships. Robert and Candy Hall were a couple like many others. Married for over a decade, they had built a life together centered around their four children in Meridian, Idaho. Robert worked as a long-haul truck driver, spending long days on the road to provide for his family. Candy, a stay-at-home mom for much of their marriage, eventually took on a role as a paralegal, seeking both personal fulfillment and additional income to support their household. By 2010, Candy began working for Emmett Corrigan, a charismatic attorney who had recently opened his own law firm. Emmett was known for his sharp legal mind and ambitious nature. At just 30 years old, he had already made a name for himself in the local legal community. He was married to Ashley, his college sweetheart, and together they were raising five children. To those around him, Emmett appeared to have it all: a growing career, a beautiful family, and a bright future ahead. Candy's professional relationship with Emmett started off as a typical employer-employee dynamic. However, as time passed, the boundaries blurred. Long hours at the office and shared confidences turned into something more personal. The two began an affair, one that would remain hidden from their spouses for months. Meanwhile, Robert Hall began to notice changes in his wife's behavior. The late-night phone calls, extended hours at work, and emotional distance hinted at something amiss. But he kept his suspicions to himself, trying to hold on to the life they had built together. Emmett's wife, Ashley, also began to sense that something was wrong. The father of her children was becoming increasingly distant, and his work commitments seemed to overshadow his time at home. While she tried to address her concerns, Emmett's reassurances failed to quell her doubts. The setting for this story was the growing suburban community of Meridian, Idaho, a place where families sought a quiet, safe environment to raise their children. Meridian was not the type of town where scandals or violence were common. That's why, when news of the events in March 2011 broke, it left the community in shock. This backdrop of family life, professional ambition, and personal struggles created the conditions for a tragic confrontation. As the lines between personal and professional lives blurred, the stage was set for a deadly encounter that would leave one man dead and two families forever changed. It was March 11th, 2011, when Robert Hall's suspicions about his wife's affair became undeniable. The clues had been building for months: late-night phone calls, unexplained absences, and a growing emotional distance between them. On this day, Robert found definitive proof. He intercepted Candy's phone and saw messages exchanged with Emmett Corrigan, confirming what he had feared all along. That evening, Candy told Robert she needed to meet Emmett to discuss a work matter. Fueled by anger and heartbreak, Robert decided he could no longer stay silent. He followed Candy to the Walgreens parking lot in Meridian, where she had arranged to meet Emmett. As Robert approached, he saw the two of them in Emmett's vehicle. It was the confrontation he had dreaded and anticipated. He demanded answers, his voice rising as emotions overflowed. Emmett, a confident and imposing figure, stepped out of the car to face Robert. Words were exchanged: accusations, defenses, and denials. The situation escalated quickly. Witnesses later recounted seeing the two men arguing intensely, their voices carrying across the parking lot. Robert's frustration turned into an act of violence when he pulled a gun and shot Emmett twice, striking him in the chest and head. The sound of gunfire shattered the quiet night. Emmett fell to the ground, fatally wounded. Candy, who had been watching the argument unfold, was now in shock. She screamed for help, dialing 911 in desperation. When police and emergency responders arrived, they found Emmett unresponsive, his body lying near his vehicle. Robert was still on the scene, visibly shaken but not resisting arrest. The aftermath of the shooting was chaotic. Law enforcement cordoned off the area as investigators began piecing together what had happened. Candy, caught between the two men in her life, was questioned extensively. Her account of the events painted a picture of a marriage in crisis and an affair that had spiraled out of control. Forensic evidence and witness statements confirmed the sequence of events, leaving little doubt about Robert's actions that night. The tragedy left Emmett Corrigan's family grieving the loss of a father and husband, while the Hall family faced the devastating consequences of Robert's decision. The events of that evening were a stark reminder of how quickly emotions can escalate into irreversible actions. A life was lost, families were broken, and a community was left grappling with the aftermath of a crime that could not be undone. When the Meridian Police Department arrived at the Walgreens parking lot on March 11, 2011, they were met with a chaotic scene. Emmett Corrigan's lifeless body lay near his vehicle, and Robert Hall was still present, visibly distraught. Candy Hall, shaken and emotional, was nearby, recounting the sequence of events in fragmented statements. The first step for law enforcement was to secure the area. They cordoned off the parking lot, preserving the crime scene for investigators. Officers interviewed witnesses who had heard the argument and the gunshots, gathering initial impressions about what had occurred. The detectives quickly zeroed in on Robert Hall as the prime suspect. He admitted to being at the scene and acknowledged firing the weapon. The gun, recovered nearby, was registered to Robert, further solidifying his involvement. However, while Robert's actions were clear, the motivation and circumstances leading up to the shooting required deeper investigation. Candy Hall was questioned extensively. She admitted to her affair with Emmett Corrigan, detailing how their relationship had evolved over time. Her account revealed a strained marriage with Robert and her growing attachment to Emmett. Yet her statements about the events of that night were inconsistent. At one point, she suggested that Robert acted in self-defense, claiming that Emmett had been aggressive during the confrontation. To corroborate her claims, investigators turned to forensic evidence. Ballistics analysis confirmed that the bullets recovered from Emmett's body matched Robert's firearm. The trajectory of the shots and the proximity between Robert and Emmett at the time of the shooting were also examined to determine whether the act was premeditated or impulsive. Meanwhile, detectives explored the digital trail left by the affair. They retrieved text messages and call records between Candy and Emmett, which provided insight into their relationship. These messages revealed plans for their meetings, as well as discussions about their future together. This evidence painted a picture of a complex and emotionally charged love triangle. Law enforcement also faced challenges during the investigation. Candy's conflicting accounts created uncertainty about the exact sequence of events. Witnesses' recollections of the confrontation varied, with some emphasizing the verbal argument and others focusing on the sudden escalation to violence. Additionally, Emmett Corrigan's family cooperated with authorities, providing details about his life, work, and relationship with Candy. They described Emmett as a devoted father and husband whose actions on that night were out of character. These insights deepened the understanding of the personal stakes involved in the case. As detectives pieced together the timeline, they faced the difficult task of distinguishing between a crime of passion and an intentional act. Their work involved extensive interviews with Robert, who claimed that his emotions overwhelmed him during the confrontation. He stated that he never intended to kill Emmett, but acted in the heat of the moment. The investigation also uncovered the emotional toll on all parties involved. Robert's actions had not only ended Emmett's life, but also devastated both families. The complexity of the case lay in its deeply personal nature, a tangled web of relationships, betrayal, and anger that culminated in tragedy. Ultimately, the investigators compiled a comprehensive case file, supported by physical evidence, witness testimonies, and forensic findings. Their meticulous efforts ensured that the events of that fateful night were accurately represented, paving the way for justice to be served. The courtroom was packed as Robert Hall's trial began in 2012, a year after the fatal shooting of Emmett Corrigan. Prosecutors charged Robert with second-degree murder, emphasizing the deadly confrontation in the Walgreens parking lot. They argued that Robert, fueled by anger and jealousy, had intentionally killed Emmett. The defense team painted a different picture. They contended that Robert acted in self-defense, claiming that Emmett had been the aggressor during the encounter. According to their account, the confrontation escalated when Emmett allegedly lunged at Robert, prompting him to fire his weapon in fear for his life. Key witnesses were called to the stand, including Candy Hall. Her testimony was scrutinized heavily as she recounted the events leading up to the confrontation. She admitted to her affair with Emmett, but maintained that she had tried to de-escalate the situation that night. However, her shifting accounts of the incident left room for doubt. The prosecution presented forensic evidence, including the trajectory of the bullets, which suggested that Robert had fired at close range. The digital trail of text messages and phone calls between Candy and Emmett also became critical pieces of evidence, shedding light on the intensity of their relationship and the emotions at play. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated on the case. In the end, they found Robert Hall guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to 30 years in prison, with a minimum of 22 years before the parole eligibility. The sentence reflected the severity of the crime while acknowledging the emotional circumstances surrounding it. The verdict brought a sense of closure for some, but the impact of the crime extended far beyond the courtroom. Emmett Corrigan's family expressed relief that justice had been served, but continued to grapple with the loss of a beloved son, husband, and father. For Candy Hall, the consequences were profound. The affair, and its tragic end, had irreparably damaged her relationships with both families. She faced public judgment and personal guilt, living with the knowledge that her choices had contributed to the events that unfolded that night. Robert Hall began his sentence in an Idaho correctional facility, leaving behind a fractured family. His children, who once looked up to him as a father figure, now had to navigate life without him. The case also resonated within the local community, serving as a cautionary tale about the devastating consequences of infidelity, betrayal, and unchecked emotions. It underscored how a single moment of violence could unravel lives and leave a lasting impact on all involved. As Robert Hall's prison sentence began, the story of Emmett Corrigan's death remained a painful reminder of the irreversible damage caused by choices made in anger and despair. The resolution in court provided legal accountability, but the emotional wounds left by the tragedy would take much longer to heal. The story of Emmett Corrigan's death is one that underscores the far-reaching consequences of choices made in moments of turmoil and betrayal. It's a tragic reminder of how a single decision can ripple outward, affecting families, friends, and communities. This case highlights the devastating impact of infidelity and dishonesty within relationships. For Emmett Corrigan, Candy Hall, and Robert Hall, the choices they made led to a chain of events that ended in heartbreak and loss. Emmett's life was cut short, leaving his wife and 5 children to navigate a future without him. Robert's actions led to a lengthy prison sentence, separating him from his own family, and Candy was left to bear the burden of her role in the tragedy. Beyond the individuals involved, the case serves as a broader cautionary tale about the dangers of unresolved conflict and unchecked emotions. It reminds us of the importance of communication, accountability, and seeking help when relationships falter. As we reflect on the lives forever altered by that night in the Walgreens parking lot, we are left with an undeniable truth. Trust and honesty are the foundations of any relationship, and when they are broken, the consequences can be devastating. This tragic story may never bring full closure to those who lived through it, but it remains a somber lesson about the choices we make and the lives they touch. What are your thoughts on this case? Could the events that unfolded that night have been prevented? Share your perspectives in the comments below. We want to hear from you. If you found this story informative, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth true crime stories. Make sure to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Have a case you'd like us to cover in a future episode? Let us know in the comments. Your suggestions help us bring you the stories you care about most.